And I would say that we can only understand the rest of the book only when we start reading Genesis and seeing the foundation that God has laid in the book of Genesis for the rest of the scriptures. And in Genesis 1 specifically, there's lots of information presented that is crucial for the rest of the story. We see concepts and ideas that are introduced that will carry through the entire Bible. And the major concepts presented in the first part of Genesis 1 and the first part of creation are light and darkness, or light versus darkness, and order versus chaos. Because if you remember in Genesis 1, creation starts out as this disorganized mess. God just says, He made everything, the earth is formless and void, and there's unrealized potential in the unformed material of creation. And only when God begins shaping and molding creation does it realize its potential. God introduces light into the darkness. He separates the two into day and night. He brings order and life to the unformed earth. He makes the sky and the seas and the land. And he separates each of these into their specific parts and brings life into each of them. The seas teem with fish, the sky with birds, and the land with animals. And over in creation, we see God bringing light and order into what he's made. God makes, God shapes, and God separates. And he helps what he has made achieve its full potential. And ultimately, that's what God does with all of his creation, every part of it, and that includes us. And that God takes our lives when we give our lives to Jesus. He takes this unformed mass that may be purposeless and void of meaning, and he takes it and he invests light into it, and he invests order into it and gives us structure, and he causes our lives to achieve the full potential that's always been present within them. And he separates in our lives the good from the bad, and he blesses the good. And as you read Genesis 1, that's sort of the general idea you get over the first 25 verses of the chapter. It's God creating, God investing, God saying it's good, and God separating. And this week we're continuing on with the story of creation, and here we come to the pinnacle of creation. This is the end of the creation story. This is what God has been building up to. And in the creation of humanity, we as people are the pinnacle of creation. Everything that was created beforehand sets the stage for this final act of creating. The creation of light, of earth, of water and sky, the creation of plants that flourish over the earth, animals that fill the sky and sea and land. All of these things are important parts of God's creation. As God puts everything together, he looks at it and says, this is good. Light is good. The earth is good. The sun and the moon, the stars, those are good. Animals, they're good. Every single step along the way, everything is good. And it's not just means like God looks at it and goes, this is thumbs up. It means when something is good, it conforms to God's plan. It is as it should be. It is made the right way. It is like a sculptor or an artist creating, painting, sculpting. And they look back at what they've made and they're like, that's good. That's how I want that to look. That is the idea that I had in my head expressed accurately in the medium in which I'm working. And God's medium is like everything. So when he looks at it and says it's good, he means that all of this conforms to what I intend for it to be. And even though these things have been created and are good, creation is still not complete. There is still more that God wants to make, even after he's made all these animals and all these birds and all these fish and all these planets and stars and everything. He wants to make something else. Because in all of creation, as you look through the first 25 verses of chapter 1, God has made all this stuff, and there is nothing in this universe that he can relate to personally yet. Now, he can personally relate to the angels. We've talked a lot about angels, but angels are not on the earth. They're also not mentioned here in the creation story. If you look at Genesis chapter 1, you will not see the angels there. God did not create the angels in Genesis chapter 1. That is simply detailing with the creation of humanity. And here you see in Job 38. And Job is one of those fantastic books of the Bible. It's one of those stories that's old story, dealing with the problem of suffering and evil in the world, which is the primary problem of our world. People look at it and say, why do bad things happen? Read the book of Job. But Job 38, God is responding to Job because Job is complaining. His friends are doing a bad job helping him. And so they're like, Job, you've done something wrong. Job's like, no, I'm innocent. And his friends are like, no, you've been bad. And then Eli comes in and he's like, you guys are full of it. I don't know what's going on. You're all wrong. Job, you're wrong. Your friends are wrong. Everybody's just arguing. And then God shows up and starts talking. Job 38. And he says, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? He's talking to Job. He said, you're so smart. You're protesting your innocence to me. You say you've done nothing wrong. Let me ask you, where were you when I made everything? What's the answer? I wasn't there. You know, God. Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Who decided how big the planet was? This guy. God did. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone? Meaning, as I put the whole earth together, I determined what it should look like. And that last line there that I separated from the previous, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God, meaning the angels, shouted for joy. The angels existed before the creation of the world. They were celebrating as God was making stuff. They're like, did you see that? He made an elephant. That thing is awesome. And another angel's like, did you see this whale he made? This thing is huge. Another angel said, did you see these mosquitoes? Why? But as you look at this, he's got angels, which remember, angels are personal beings, but they're spirit. They're not physical. And so God made a world that's physical, but in the entire world, there's nothing he can relate to. There's no personality that he can interact with. I mean, dogs probably loved God. As God walked through there, the dogs were probably all jumping on him, excited and happy and stuff. And the cats probably looked at him and tolerated him and were like, yeah, okay, whatever. But there's nothing he could know person to person. And God wanted to create something physical, personal on the earth. Something that was unique and special. And in humanity, we see that people are distinct from the rest of creation. I am going to say things that are counter to what some of you learned in school. That's okay. But humanity is distinct and separate from the rest of creation in a special way. Let's look at the introduction to the creation of humanity in verse 26. God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and all of the earth and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And immediately we see a difference in God's approach to people. When God made light, verse 3 of the Bible, what does it say? And God said, let there be light. And then as we read down, verses 6, verses 9, verses 11, verses 14, verses 24, God just says, let there be, and there was. There is no expression of God's heart in the matter. God just says, I want light, there's light. I want a sun and a moon, there's a sun and a moon. I want dry land to appear, dry land appears. Over and over, God does not preface his creation in any way. He simply commands and his creation responds. But when God creates people, there is a different approach. When God creates people, God starts off by expressing intention. Let us make mankind in our image and after our likeness. No other part of creation is made in God's image. Not plants, not birds, not fish, nor animals. Each of these are made after their kinds, and we see this in verse 24. God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds. So you have your cow kind, you have your bird kind, your elephant kind, your fish kind. Each is different, made special by God. But people are not made by kind, they are created specially. And verse 26 tells us God's intent. We are made in his image and after his likeness. And the idea of an image or a likeness was well understood in the ancient world. When God said this, let us make mankind in our image or in our likeness. The image of a God, and this is the thing that we sort of not lose in our almost, we have one dominant religion in the United States. I'm going to talk a little bit about our country this week. In the United States, we have one dominant religion, and that religion is Christianity. Everybody's a Christian of some color, shape, size. Catholic, Protestant, Anglican, we call them Episcopalian. Episcopalian, Methodist, Wesleyan, Pentecostal, Independent, non-affiliated, Baptist, whatever. You know somebody who's a Christian. We don't have a lot of other religions here. We have a Zoroastrian temple up Garden Ridge Boulevard, which surprised me. But we don't have a lot of temples just around. I went to China. They have temples everywhere. And they got in those temples little idols. And that's something that's expressed here in Genesis 1. Because who's writing Genesis 1? Who's the author of Genesis? Moses. Moses is writing this in a culture that is extremely polytheistic. There are temples everywhere. And in those temples, you have a little carved or chiseled or whatever formed image of a deity that this temple is dedicated to. Little guy sitting there, probably about yay big, made out of wood or stone or metal or whatever. And this was the image of that god. And that image was an object that represented that god to the world. We would call this image an idol, but you get the idea. The image was supposed to. Then the thing is, the belief about the image, the belief of this little created object was that this image was to represent the god to the world. It was supposed to contain in some fashion the spirit of that god, and it was the presence of that god for the people. That's what the image did. So for us, humanity, this language is very, very important and very steeped in an idea that we kind of have gotten away from. If we are the image of God on the earth, we are the representation of God to the rest of creation. We are the literal objects that represent God to everything else on the planet. We contain the Spirit of God. And we are the presence of God in the world that He has made. That's what this idea, in our image after our likeness. And the idea of image and likeness actually goes deeper than that. God made us in His image, and in some sense to reflect Him so that we could communicate with Him. I'm certain God communicates to all of creation. I'm certain the animals, if we could get through to them, they know God in a way that we don't. But God talks with us in a special way, as people. He talks to us in words and sentences and concepts. And He reveals His truth to us personally and through His Word in the Bible. And He doesn't do that for any other part of creation. You don't see your dog reading the Bible, or the dog Bible equivalent. You don't see cats or birds reading it. God has communicated to us specially. And the idea of the image and likeness is fundamental to our role as humans. In fact, this idea is crucial not only to Genesis, which we will see this carried over when Adam and Eve were created, and then they talk and they interact with each other. We won't even see this carried over in Genesis, but we'll see this carried through the rest of the book. This is one of those major truths, like God creating everything. Last week, the major truth was God made everything. This week, the major truth is that human beings are made in God's image and after His likeness. And if we bear the image of God, we are like Him in a way that nothing else on this world is. No animal, no angel, no plant, no star in the sky is comparable to us. We have been endowed with a spark of divinity. And we have a capacity to relate to God as persons. Because God is personal. This is the fundamental truth of the nature of God that the image and likeness carries over to God. Is the reason we can know God is because God has made us like Him. And God is personal, meaning that He is a person. He has a will, He has an intelligence, and He has emotions. And we, of all physical creation, we can know God with that respect because we have been given a will, we have been given emotions, we have been given intelligence. And because we're made in God's image, and this is the truth, I'm talking about a vertical truth now. I talk about knowing God and relating to God because we're personal, and God's a person, but this idea that human beings are made in God's image, not just is a vertical truth, but it is a horizontal truth as well, meaning it should influence how we relate to other people. Because we're made in God's image, each person, each human is of infinite value. Our lives, all lives, everyone, everywhere has eternal value. Not because of anything they have done or will do. Not whether they're old or young, whatever race or sex or ethnicity, however you want to slice it. Every single person has value because they are made in the image of God. And Jesus reiterates this concept in Matthew 25. This is so much later in the Bible. This is the first book of the New Testament. This is 40 books later in the Bible. 2,000 years approximately later in the history of Revelation, from Moses to Jesus. 2,000 to 1,500 years later. Jesus says, and this is the judgment where Jesus separates the sheep from the goats. And He says to the sheep, He says, "Blessed are you of the Father," come in, for when I was naked, you clothed me. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me a drink. When I was in prison, you visited me. And they say, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or whatever? And Jesus said to them, the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. And this idea, this truth that Jesus says in Matthew 25 is rooted in the idea that we all carry the image of God. So in some sense, whatever you do to another person, you are doing to God. How you treat them is how you treat me, God says, whether you recognize it or not. Which should fill our lives, our actions, and our words with practically infinite meaning. Every single person you talk to, whether you blow them off and ignore them, whether they're talking to you and you're going, and you're zoning out thinking about something you're going to do later. That's how you're treating God. If Jesus were standing here talking to you, you wouldn't be zoning out thinking about, man, what am I going to have for lunch? Oh, okay, cool. And then sort of engage back when you hear them be done talking. It fills everything you do with meaning and value. Everything we do is of value because it's basically done to God. And the truth that we bear God's image and likeness is the first thing said about us in the Bible. Think about this. If you read the Bible from start to finish, this is the first thing that God says about people. Let's make them in our image. Which means this is the first and foremost thing that God wants us to know about us. And this truth encapsulates all other truths about us in the Bible. Before we're told that God loves us, for God so loved the world, John 3:16. Before we're commanded to love God and love other people, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, Matthew 22. Before we deal with sin, or sacrifice, or prayer, or fasting, or anything else, before any of these other concepts are introduced in the Bible, God says, you bear my image. You are like me in a way that nothing else is. And this is the foundation upon which everything else is built. All of our theology is essentially built on this truth, that we are made in God's image. And though that image of God in us is corrupted and sullied by the fall, I know as we're talking about this, you're like, what about Genesis 3 when Adam and Eve fall? We're going to come to that in a couple weeks. Because we do still bear the image of God, but it has been corrupted. And though it is rejected by our naturalistic, materialistic culture, I am thankful for our culture. I'm thankful for medicine. I'm thankful for all the wonderful technology things that it has brought about. Computers are wonderful. Love them. But our culture is then naturalistic and materialistic, and it leads us away from the truth that we are all made in God's image. We are all representatives of God to each other and to the planet, which we'll come to later. And in verse 26, there's a truth I want to come back to here in verse 26, Genesis 1, is that we are given dominion over the planet. Next slide, please, Cole. Let's make mankind in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over, and then he says everything. And basically, God gives us dominion over the entire planet. The whole planet, everything on it. And the idea of a dominion, this is a very specific word. God's using specific words here, and we got to look at these specific words and understand what they mean. The idea of a dominion is a little strange and foreign to us because we live in the good old US of A. In America, as Americans, most everybody here has lived in this, or is either American or has lived here a little bit of a while. And you get the American culture. We are free. That's like the thing that we try to tell ourselves. We have like bald eagles flying in the background. We're free. Salute the flag, all that stuff. We are beholden to no one. The foundation of our country is rooted in us fighting against the tyrannical government that was making us pay for a war to protect us, which is a different subject. But we fought off the British. We got our independence. We are free. We have the Bill of Rights. We have Declaration of Independence. We have the Constitution. We have all these freedoms. We are liberated. We are independent. We are under no person's heel. But because of that cultural background, we've lost some ideas. Monarchies were, for the history of mankind, the primary mode of government. A king or a queen was your ultimate ruler for most people for most of history. The idea of a democracy and an elected officials, very, very new concept in the big scheme of things. And because of our cultural background, we've lost the idea of a kingdom and a dominion. And here's a fancy word for you. We've lost the idea of suzerainty. Because when we hear dominion, because you see, I read over this and you guys didn't even like bat an eye at this. Let them have dominion. You're like, okay, yep, sure. We got dominion, whatever that is, we got it. We just think kingdom and then sort of our brain goes, dominion, yeah, kingdom, we're in charge here, got it, whatever. But a dominion is a specific term in the political sphere. And I know that a dominion is a specific political term because I lived in Canada for 7 years. Anybody else ever here live in Canada? Few of you? And this is something that fascinates me, until 1982, Canada was a dominion of the Queen. This is an old ad for something that I don't even care about. But this, at the top, you can see the Queen's dominions. And all those red areas are areas that are at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. Less than 100 years ago, guys. Canada, Australia, India, South Africa, all of these things were part of the dominion of the crown. And because it was a dominion of the crown, it means the country, though independent, was still ruled by the king or the queen. And today, vestiges of this dominion status are still around. If I lived in Canada, and do you know what happens when you go to court in Canada? Okay, I wasn't in court being sued by anything. Somebody else was there, and they're like, Pastor, can you come support me? And I was like, yeah, sure. And so when you go into court, they got on the back wall, as you're looking behind the judge, guess whose picture's on the back wall? Her Majesty the Queen. Looking younger because they took the picture 50 years ago. And they say, all rise in the name of Her Majesty the Queen. And I was like, I'm an American. I was like, oh, but I live here and I don't want to get in trouble. So I said, sorry. Who is the head of state in Canada? Who's the head of state in Canada? The Queen. Still technically the Queen. You might say Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, but officially not. It's the Queen. It's still technically the head of state. And the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, delegates the authority of her dominion to a person in the Canadian government. And this is the fascinating thing, is because I studied this, because I love government, and I love politics, and I love history. Who is the designated person, we'll say, who carries the Queen's authority in Canada? The Governor General. Thank you. The Governor General acts on the sovereign's behalf in the Dominion. And whenever the government of Canada does something, they basically do it and bring it to the Governor General and it's like, can we do this? And they kind of stamp it and they're like, yeah, sure, whatever. They still act the part out because it's part of the dominion of the crown. And the king or the queen delegates authority over their dominion to someone else, which is exactly the language that is used here in Genesis 1:26. The queen does not sit there and run around Canada worrying about everything. She delegates her authority to the Governor General. The Governor General oversees the government. I know it's just like, they don't actually carry any authority anymore, but that's the idea. God is here making humanity the suzerain or the regent or the steward of the planet Earth. We see this idea of stewardship. I'm just going to tie in a movie that I like, or book/movie that I like, Lord of the Rings. If you remember in Lord of the Rings, who is the king of Gondor? Who is the rightful king of Gondor? Aragorn. But who acts as the steward of Gondor? Denethor, the guy who sets himself on fire and jumps off the building. Okay, I've lost you. That's okay. Bring it back. Spoilers. The movie is like 20 years old. How can I spoil a 20-year-old movie? Because ultimately, if we think about humanity having dominion over the earth, as a regent over the earth, as a steward over the earth, who is ultimately in charge of the earth? Ultimately, God. God is king over the earth. But who rules the dominion of the earth on God's behalf? Us. Which means God has entrusted us not only to rule the planet, but to take care of it. Now you guys know me. I'm going to take this idea of having dominion over it, not to just rule over it, but to take care of it. I'm going to unpackage this a little bit. You guys know me. Would anyone here say I'm a hippie? By any stretch of the imagination? No. My employees here at Kids Kingdom call me uptight and boring, which I'm kind of proud of. And it's accurate, so But if we look at how God has entrusted us as regents over the planet Earth, we are 100% responsible not only for ruling the planet, but for caring for the planet. We are the ones who are to take care of the plants and animals. We are the ones to take care of the mountains, rivers, and oceans. Meaning, we are responsible for everything on the planet as God's regent. This is our dominion. And how we care for this earth, our dominion, will reflect how we view God. How would God treat this planet? That's how we should treat this planet. We can't just be like, yeah, thanks God, we're in charge, and then do whatever the heck we want. We got to say, all right, we're in charge for this person. How would this person who's in charge, God, treat our planet? And we should act like that. As a result, we should try to ruin this earth as little as possible. Now, I know we can't just not pollute it all, because I don't want to go back to the Dark Ages or become Amish. But we should take care of our planet better than we are. Now, I say this, and I'm like, none of you are going to be able to sit there and make, the Shell Oil Company cut their emissions by 45% in the next 10 years. You guys aren't going to be able to do that. We don't, unless somebody here is hiding something from me, nobody's that high up in the political or economic structure of our world. Anybody? No? No hands? Okay, good. Everybody's looking around. Really? Are you the CEO of Microsoft? No. We should try to take care of our planet better than we are. If it's our dominion, if we're in charge of it, and reflecting how God should treat it, we are to clean up our messes, care for the animals and plants. This is our dominion. And we will answer for how we treat our domain. Anybody here ever heard the phrase, don't mess with Texas? What does that mean? Thumbs up over there. What does don't mess with Texas mean? Don't litter. Don't throw your garbage on the side of the road. You see it on the... Don't litter. You should have a sign over the earth that says, don't mess with earth. We take pride in that. As Texans, we get a little bit of pride in being Texan. We should have a little bit of pride in our planet, being Terrans, if I can use that term. We are made in God's image. We represent Him to the planet, so the implications of this are huge. God invests in us as humanity a tremendous amount. This planet is our dominion. We are His delegated authorities. We should reflect God to this planet in a way that is better than we are. The next verse is the actual creation of humanity, verse 27 of chapter 1. This is expounded on later in chapter 2. We're going to come into chapter 2. We'll discuss how God makes man different. There's more detail there. But suffice it to say here that God is being inclusive of all humanity. Because look at what it says. God created man in His own image. Now this word, when we say man, we don't just mean dudes. Because if you look, the rest of that explains it. God created man, meaning humanity, in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and female, He created them. God made us all, men and women, in His image. Not just Adam was made in God's image, but Eve too. Let me tell you, Adam and Eve, very different. But both bear the image of God. It may be present in different ways. And this is something that I think we tend to miss because we use the word, the masculine he for God. But in what ways do women bear the image of God? My wife loves my kids in a way that I don't understand. I acknowledge their existence. I try to rule over them and guide them. But she has a compassion and a love for our children that is reflective of God's compassion and love for us that is almost foreign to me. That's a good thing. There are differences between men and women that are differences in how we express God's image to the world that we should embrace and say, yes, we need both parties to do everything. Adam and Eve were designed to work hand in hand, helping each other. I'm getting ahead of myself, preaching a couple sermons ahead. Back to chapter 1. In verse 28, we see God blessing humanity after He created them. This is a threefold blessing, and I kind of chunked it that way. Each blessing specific to why He created them. First part, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That's the first blessing. be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. As stewards of the planet, they should cover the earth. Think about how long. I don't care if Adam is alive for a billion years. If it's just Adam and Eve, how long over this planet is it going to take them to subdue the entire planet? And to at least just walk, not even do anything, but just to walk around the whole planet, to see the whole planet. How long would it take Adam and Eve to do that as a couple? Well, honey, we're going to walk another 30 miles today and see some of it, and then we're going to walk more tomorrow. It would take you way too long for one couple, two people, to at least survey the entire planet that they had dominion over. And that's just the land part. Think about if they had to, if God gave them the ability to breathe underwater, if they're going to go swim with the fish and the whales and say hi and high five sharks and stuff. It conceivably forever. So God says, hey, you guys are stewards in here. You're in charge. Be fruitful, multiply. Have lots of kids. Fill this place up. As stewards of the planet, they had to cover the earth. Adam's descendants were to carry out the commission that he was given. The whole planet was given to them. It was all frontier. And they were to fill it so that they could do what God commanded. The next part is subdue the earth. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. That was a blessing God gave them. Meaning they were to harness the power of the world as its regents. They were, on the one hand, to take care of it, which is very important. Taking care of what your resources are is very, very important. But on the other hand, they were to get the world, in some sense, to work for them. And I see this exemplified in two fantastic ways that we've developed our world: in medicine and in agriculture. In medicine, we harness the power. All we do in medicine is we take stuff that God's made and we're like, hey, we're going to mix this with this and we give it to this person. Hey, look, it makes you get better. That's great. Antibiotics are a usage of medicine, of things that we have here to get people to get better. Big fans. Agriculture. Hey, instead of starving all the time, why don't we plant things in the ground and then harvest them when they get better? When they get bigger, and then eat them, and then save some of the seeds so they can plant more later. Brilliant. Get the world to work for you. Subdue it. Be in charge. Don't be all like walking around, oh, we'll just do whatever. No. Subdue the earth. Be in charge of the earth. Be powerful. Which is included in the last part. Have dominion. They were designated as regents. God endorsed their role. Every animal was subject to them. And their divine position. As God's image, they represented him to the world. They were to tame beasts, harness the power of nature. They were to rule as God in God's stead, to have a relationship with God and to interact with him in this world. And we see in the creation of humanity the wonderful role that God has created for us to play. If you really look at these verses, God has given in our creation us tremendous authority, tremendous potential. Verse 31 is the conclusion of the creation narrative. This is great. End of chapter 1. God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Not just, I like that. Ooh, that part of that painting, that's real pretty. Oh, I like this person standing right here. That's good. Okay, the background, God takes a step back and looks at everything and says, this is very good. I really like this. I am proud of what I've created here. Only at the end of creation is everything very good. God looks over all that he's made, the stars in the sky, the sun, the planets in orbit. Think about God looking at everything. He looks at everything down from the quark level. You know what a quark is? The subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, all made out of quarks. Okay. God looks at everything from the smallest level possible to the biggest level possible. He's looking at galaxies. He's looking at planets. He's looking at Neptune and Jupiter and Saturn with its rings. He looks at Mars as it's red. He looks at Venus as it's super hot. He looks at our sun. He looks at the moon going around and he goes, man, this is great. Looks at the galaxy, says, all these stars, great. Look at these big ones, these tiny ones, these black holes that I made. They're everything. And he looks at the world and he's like, look at the sky. He stands on the earth, looks up at the sky, looks at the birds, listens to the birds chirping, listens to the animals as they move around, watches Adam and Eve as they're starting to interact with each other. And he's like, this is great. This is a masterpiece. It is very good. He sees his whole creation and is pleased with it. He is very pleased. I bet you God laughed and said, he's so happy. I did something great. Look at how great this is. All the angels. Guys, come on. Did you see this? Look how great this is. It makes him happy. And this concludes the creation account in Genesis 1, caps off the sixth day. We see all of creation as good, in line with God's intentions, and meets his approval. And there's a lot to unpack here in Genesis 1 and the creation of people. And I just want to recapitulate a couple of those truths real quick. The major truth we find here in the creation of humanity is that we bear God's image, which again means this is the first and foremost thing God wants us to know about us. What does God want us to know first and foremost about us? Is that we are made in his image. Genesis 1, chapter 1, page 1 of the Bible. You are made in my image. First thing he wants you to know about it. And this truth encapsulates all of the truths about the Bible, because God says, you bear my image. You are like me in a way that nothing else is. And as we look around our world, and this is the funny thing, is Moses wrote this 2,000 years ago, and the more we look into outer space, the more we look down on our planetary level, the smaller we get with looking at Higgs bosons and all those things. The farther we look out in the galaxy, we say, we are the only thing in this entire universe that we have observed that is looking around going, what's going on? Why are we here? We are like God in a way that nothing else is. And this is the foundation upon which everything else is built in the Bible. All of our theology is based on the fact that we bear God's image. And I would say this truth about humanity, that we bear God's image, is the second most important revelation in the Bible. The most important revelation of the Bible is Jesus, because it's Jesus. But even that revelation is based on the image of God in humanity. Why did Jesus become human? Because we are made in God's image. Because we are fallen and corrupted, and he still loves us, and we still bear his image. Therefore, Jesus is like, I still love them so much, even though they messed it up. I love them so much that I need to go and die for their sins so that I can somehow fix this problem. And Jesus is the perfect expression of the image of God in humanity. Jesus is the culmination of what we see in Genesis 1:26. God said, let us make mankind in our image, and Jesus is like, I'm going to be the perfect expression of what that image should be like. And without understanding that we are made in God's image, humanity is without hope. We live in a Western culture. Our Western culture, I don't mean like Western, please, when I say Western, don't think like old Western, cowboy hat, boots, ching-ching, walk into the bar, shoot first, ask questions later. I mean Western culture as in influenced by Greek and Roman ideas of democracy and the importance of the personhood. But our culture is Western culture. It's basically American and European culture. It's based on the idea that we are made in God's image. It is core to our culture because our Western culture is built on Judeo-Christian concepts. And the intrinsic value of humans is central to our culture. The intrinsic value of humans. Think about that. Why should anybody else here be of any value? Separate from the Bible. Just looking at other people. You would look around and be like, why aren't men worth more than women? Why aren't adults worth more than children? Why is this race not worth more than this race? Just looking at that without the Bible, people start coming to those conclusions. Separate from God, people get real bad with each other, guys. And our culture is so steeped in the truth that is in the Bible that we are made in God's image that we don't even know it. People who are like, yeah, God, whatever, but I don't believe in him, still hold value for other people because they have been influenced by the Bible, and they don't know it. We cannot discard this truth that we are made in God's image and expect it not to affect every single one of us. And even if we try to discard it, even if people are like, we're going to move as far away from God as possible, we're going to be as secular, as divorced from religion as possible, we can't do it. This idea is still embedded thoroughly in everything that we do. Even here in the United States, this is present in our founding documents. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That's literally taking the truth of Genesis 1 and sticking it in the founding documents of our country. Our culture, our way of life is built on the idea that each person bears God's image. And since God has made us in his image, we see the great challenge and great charge placed on us in humanity. Of all creation, we are special, meaning we are to represent God to this world. Meaning how we act to the world should reflect what God would do. And God expects that we should love this planet as he does. This is a good planet. Of all the planets in the solar system, Earth is my favorite. I would rather live here than on Mars or on Venus or Mercury. I don't even think I could live on Jupiter. But it's a very good planet. We should be taking care of not only the Earth itself, like the mountains, the rivers, the plains, the water and the dirt that make up our planet, but we should take care of everything that lives on this planet. Every animal, every plant, every bird, and every sea creature. And I've said it before, and I'll repeat it here. How we care for this earth will reflect how we view God. Our love for this planet should first and foremost stem from a love for God. And let me conclude with this thought. I'm just repeating a point from earlier, and I know you guys are probably tired of hearing it, but it needs to be ingrained so deep into us because we fight against it. But that we are made in God's image, so each person is of infinite value. Everyone everywhere has eternal value, not because of anything that they've done or have done or will do. Whether they're old or young, whatever race, sex, ethnicity, everyone has value because they are made in the image of God. And we are required to treat all people as bearers of God's image because they are. Which should overcome any racism, any sexism, any ageism. Guys, we have lots of things going on in our culture. We have the Black Lives Matter movement. We have feminism, which plays a strong role in our culture. And I think a lot of these things would almost, at the point, be unnecessary if every single person treated every single other person as bearing God's image. We wouldn't need any of that stuff. Because we'd say, I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care what your background is. I don't care if you're a boy or a girl or whatever you think you are. I should love you because you bear God's image. Whether I agree with you or not, whether I agree with how you behave or not, I should still love you and treat you with kindness and respect, no matter how hard it may be, because you bear God's image. Every person you deal with, whether you know them well or not, bears God's image. And if we bear God's image and represent his love to them, then our actions should reflect that core truth. We should love every person because in some sense, this person is, I bear God's image to them and they bear God's image to me. And I felt challenging writing this sermon because, think about it, I got pretty green in this sermon. Like, the Green Party doesn't know how good they have it. They have biblical background and support for every Christian to be like, yes, we should go green. You want to take care of the planet? You want us to recycle more? You want us to reduce carbon emissions? All that global warming stuff? We should be like, we should do everything we can to care for this planet because it's very good and it's the only one we got. Then we talk about political issues over here. We're discussing the value of people and all these civil rights movements. We should be like, every single person, I gotta love you because you bear God's image. So you can't be like, well, take a step back and be like, nope. Every single person I value. And we should encourage every single person we know to value every single other person because of God's image. And it should challenge us to the core of our being because we're sinful. Because we have tendencies to want to hang out with people that look like us and think like us and talk like us and act like us. But no matter how much you disagree with them, we can just pick on the last two presidents. Joe Biden, does he bear God's image? Yep. Donald Trump, does he bear God's image? Yep. Whether you like them both, which I don't know how anyone would, but I mean possibly. They're very different men. Very different ends of the political spectrum. Guess what? Every single person who supports Joe Biden, do they bear God's image? Are you required to love them biblically? You bet. Every single Trump supporter, do they bear God's image? Should you be required to love them? Yep. This should challenge us, guys. And this is what makes me so, I'm getting on my soapbox here a little bit at the end of this sermon. This should challenge us in the state of our political discourse right now. I'll leave it at that. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, Thank you for getting me off my soapbox. Thank you, Holy Spirit, for being like, maybe you should just stop. I appreciate that, Lord. I appreciate even more the truth that is in the Bible, that you want us to care for your planet and you want us to care for each other because we are your image bearers to this world. Lord, this is a tremendous responsibility, and I don't think we really understand it. But would you help us, please, to the core of our being, love and value and appreciate others because they bear your image. Help us to be like you to other people. Help us to love this planet, Lord, because you love it so much. Help us to love every single part of it because it is very good. And God, I know it's easy to say love people and value them when we're in this church service, when we're not arguing with each other, when we're not fighting, we're not seeing things that upset us or make us frustrated. But God, help us as we go out from here. When things start irking us, when people get on our nerves, when we get upset or frustrated or sad with other people, God, help us to remember that they bear your image. Young or old, smart or not, whether they agree with us or not, Lord. Help us to treat them with love and with kindness, because that's what you want them. Lord Jesus, I thank you for this wonderful world. I thank you for these wonderful people you've put in this world. All 7 billion of them. Lord, I ask for a blessing here on the people who are listening to me this morning, that you would give us increased grace, that your Spirit would empower us to express love and kindness based on the truth that you put in the Bible. I thank you for it. And I ask that you would help us to let that seed of truth find its spot in our heart and bear fruit in us. And I ask this in Jesus' name.